This is going to be Chapter 1, Introduction to Anatomy and Physiology. Section 1 here, the science of anatomy and physiology. We're going to talk about gross anatomy, microscopic anatomy, and then physiology. Introduction. Anatomy. Anatomy is the study of internal structure and the physical relationship between body parts. Physiology is the study of how living organisms perform their vital functions. So the study of how the organism actually provides the vital functions, and then anatomy is just pretty much the structure itself. So you combine them both together and you get both the structure and the function of the part that we're talking about. Anatomy. Gross anatomy, microscopic anatomy, and then physiology will be talked about in this section. Anatomy. Gross anatomy. Macroscopic anatomy considers features visible with the unaided eye. We have surface anatomy, which is the study of general forms. We have regional anatomy, which is superficial and internal features in a specific region. And then we have systemic anatomy, considers structure of major organ systems. Microscopic anatomy. Microscopic anatomy, structures that cannot be seen with the naked eye, is what we look at here. And then we have two other terms. And the term cytology, internal structures of individual cells. So if we were sending something down to a cytologist, they would look at the individual cells themselves and their internal structures. Whenever we get to the tissue level, we're going to look at cells and we're going to find out that they have organelles in them, or little small parts that do a specific job. And then we have histology, examines tissues or a group of specialized cells. So if you took a sample of the liver, the histologist would actually take a look at it and decide on whether or not it was cancerous, if that's what it was sent off for, or if it was benign. Histology, the study of tissues. Physiology. We have cell physiology, which is the study of functions of living cells. So a cell physiologist would actually take a look at specific cells and say, what do these cells do in this specific environment? And then we have a special physiology, study of physiology of specific organs. So this physiologist may only study about the kidneys or about the lungs or about the heart. Systemic physiology considers all aspects of specific organs. So if we were looking at a systemic physiologist, they would look at the overall, how the heart works in relationship to the lungs and how the vasculature system works in relationships to the other two. So a very broad approach to the study of how things work. Pathological physiology, or pathology, the study of diseases effects on an organ. So a forensic pathologist is an example. A forensic pathologist looks for foul play or natural cause of disease that actually led to a person's death. So if they found that the person had atherosclerotic heart disease and that's what gave him an active MI and that's what ended up killing him, the pathologist would be the one that would take a look at these things and structures and take a look at the disease and how it affected the body and what might have actually killed the person. The levels of organization and identification of the levels here. So levels identified, chemical or molecular, which is the very smallest, an atom level, smallest stable unit of matter. An example of this is going to be water and salt. And then cellular, cells are the smallest living units in the body. Example is going to be a skin cell or a heart cell, a specific cell, and that organ has multitudes of cells in them. And then a tissue, composed of similar cells that work together to perform a similar function. An example of this is going to be the heart, lungs, liver, and etc. Levels continue. Organ. consists of two or more tissues together that work to perform a specific function. Example is going to be the heart, different tissues that work together. And then organ system. They interact with other organs. Example is the heart and the blood vessels, or the blood and the blood vessels. And then organism. All of the organ systems of the body work together to maintain life and health. Example, this is going to be the human itself. The human being is a gigantic organism that is chock-filled of multiple organs and organ systems that work together to keep the body alive. And this is kind of an overall view of all the organ systems. We're going to look at these, and then each chapter is kind of assigned to these. Examples from the left here, which is integument or skin. We have skeletal, muscular, nervous, endocrine, cardiovascular, lymphatic, respiratory, digestive, urinary, and then reproductive. Example of this, as they're showing, is the actual cardiovascular, which would be the heart. And then the heart itself, at the tissue level, we would be taking a look at cardiac muscle cells. And then at the cellular level, we would be taking a look at the individual muscle cell. And then this here, we would take a look at how actually the muscle cell of the heart contracts, or the cells shorten. And then in this area here, this is going to be the chemical or molecular level. And then this here is off of those chemicals, this is going to be the atomic level. So we're going to go down from this all the way down to this in this series. Introduction to organ systems. Those are the overall organ systems that we just looked at in the last slide. Integumentary, skeletal, muscular, nervous, endocrine, cardiovascular, lymphatic, respiratory, digestive, urinary, and reproductive. The integument system, pretty much the skin and all the associated glands, fingernails, hair, the actual skin covering that would protect the body against environmental hazards. We'll talk about that. And I think chapter 3 or 4. And the skeletal, which provides structure, muscles attached to the skeleton and then are underneath the skin, provides support, protects tissues, stores minerals, and forms blood. Couple hundred bones is what you're going to have to remember whenever we get to the skeletal system. We have two types of skeletons here. We have the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. And if you'll just remember that the axial skeleton is the head, spinal column, and pretty much the rib cage. Everything that's in yellow there. And the appendicular skeleton is going to be all the bones that are attached to that, via ligaments, tendons, muscles, and what have you. Muscular system. You have axial muscles and then appendicular muscles. And the axial muscles is what would keep the axial skeleton, my apologies, held intact and straight. Tendons actually attach muscle group to muscle group. Allows for locomotion, provides support, and produces heat, because without this, our bones and our skin alone could not produce enough heat to actually keep our body warm. The nervous system, and this is pretty much the central control system, directs immediate responses to stimuli, usually by coordinating the activities of other organ systems. We have the peripheral nervous system and peripheral nerves, and then we have the central nervous system, which includes the brain and spinal column. The endocrine. We have several organs here, and the endocrine system pretty much is an easy way to get multiple organ systems pointed in the right direction. Directs long-term changes in activities of other organs. An example of this is the pancreas. Inside of the pancreas you have something called cells in a section of it called the islands of Langerhans. These cells are alpha, beta, and delta cells. Alpha cells secrete glucagon, beta cells secrete insulin, and delta cells secrete somatostatin. So whenever you need sugar for your body, or dextrose, or glucose for your body, the alpha cells secrete glucagon, which go to your liver, and break apart polysaccharides that you've stored there in the form of glycogen. The glycogen is produced into individual glucose molecules. The beta cells allow the glucose into the cell, and then the delta cells, once the cells have enough glucose, puts the brakes on this whole process of gluconeogenesis, or the production of sugar. The endocrine system, we'll learn about them in detail. They're an easy way to activate a multitude of organ systems simultaneously through the use of hormones. Cardiovascular system. This is one we probably should be paying attention to the most. We're going to find most of our problems in this system. The heart, the arteries, the veins, the capillaries, the vascular structures in the lungs. Anybody that has heart disease or has a heart attack or goes into full arrest from a cardiac cause, this is what is hampered, the cardiovascular system, and it transports cells and dissolved materials, including nutrients, waste, and gases, and that's to all the body parts, the cardiovascular system. Lymphatics defend against infection and disease, returns tissue fluid into the bloodstream. And if we think about a very Barney answer for the lymphatic structures, they are pretty much the trash can of the body. If you have an infection, lymph nodes are located throughout your body, and these will move away wastes and store them in there until your body can process them, have macrophagic action on them through the white blood cells or whatever. But the lymphatic structure is an important draining part that occurs in your body, or that is run throughout your body. Respiratory system. Sinuses, navel cavity, the pharynx, the trachea, larynx, bronchi, lungs, and diaphragm. Delivers air to sites where gas exchange can occur between the air and the circulating blood. This allows us to oxygenate the circulating blood that is going through the pulmonary trunk. Vital part, we couldn't live without it. Cardiorespiratory or cardiovascular, cardiopulmonary is an integral part. We're going to see problems with these structures as well whenever we hit the EMS section. Digestive, salivary, pharynx, esophagus, processes food and absorb nutrients. The small intestine is pretty much an absorption ground for all food, all of your nutrients. It eliminates wastes in the small and large intestine, and then eliminates them from the body. So the digestive system is an integral part, and we'll need to learn about it in detail. Urinary system, kidneys, ureter, urethra, urinary bladder, eliminates excessive water, salts, and waste products. The kidneys actually eliminate excessive electrolytes, byproducts of protein metabolism. Lots of things get eliminated through your kidneys. You can only live without your kidneys for a certain amount of time. If you go into kidney failure and it's unannounced and unknown, you can go into lethal arrhythmias that occur in your heart within a matter of days. And the reproductive in the male, we'll learn about it in detail. It produces sex cells and hormones. The hormones are essential for your characteristics and your ability to move metabolism through your body. And the same way with the female reproductive system, produces sex cells and hormones. Hormones are going to be essential. Reproductive system we'll learn about in detail as well. As far as OB, you'll need to have a pretty good understanding of this. Homeostasis and system integration. Homeostatic regulation, adjustment in the physiological system that preserves homeostasis. A negative feedback system. The opposite response initiates the action. And a positive feedback system. Whenever we look at a positive feedback system, in a positive feedback system, the response is reinforced by the action. So an example of this on a negative feedback system. You require more body heat. So your hypothalamus says, I need more body heat. Your metabolic rate in your entire body kicks up and it produces more body heat generation from the muscles. At the point that your body temperature is high enough, it then sends a negative feedback. The negative feedback is that the stimulus that occurs is the opposite reaction. So instead of stimulating and getting more and more of the stimulus to increase your body heat, whenever you have your body heat is risen to an appropriate level, the negative feedback would do just the opposite. So it'll shut down the actual increase of body heat. A positive feedback system is the actual action reinforces it. So an example of this, the best example that I can think of, is oxytocin, and this would be during active labor. So the only thing that will stop the oxytocin is the delivery of the child once it gets maneuvering and cascading in the body. So the actual action, whenever labor starts, it initiates oxytocin. Well, the oxytocin brings about more labor. So the positive feedback system there is that it is reinforcing the first action. And then homeostasis and disease, we'll talk about that. Balance and disease. Homeostatic regulation. Homeostasis, a stable internal environment or balance. Homeostatic regulation, adjustments of the physiological systems to maintain balance. You do this through three different sections here. You have a receptor, item that is sensitive to a stimulus of a certain environment, and then a control center receives and processes information from the actual receptor, and then an effector organ responds to the commands of the control center, reinforces stimulus. Okay, so in homeostasis, you have someone that's listening, and then you have a control center that's over it. The only thing that homeostasis does is it maintains balance. An example of this: fight or flight, feed or breed, which are two sections of the autonomic nervous system. If you saw an alligator and the alligator was going to eat you, fight or flight would initiate. The receptors that would pay attention to fight or flight now are all paying attention. But you've kind of tipped the scales, if you will. Your sympathetic tone has increased at least tenfold. So the control center says, okay, we can't run off of jet fuel like this for a very long period of time. So to compensate and to balance things, it would increase parasympathetic tone. The parasympathetic tone works just like a teeter-totter. And I'll draw this down here. Sympathetic, parasympathetic. It works just like a teeter-totter. Then, at the point that you increased parasympathetic tone, the only way your body has to combat that is to increase parasympathetic tone until, again, this is balanced. So the effector organ would be the organs responding to it. The control center would be monitoring the sympathetic and the parasympathetic tone, and the receptors would be paying attention to the hormones that they've been acted upon. Negative feedback. Action that opposes a stimulus. An example of this is going to be thermal regulation. The body gets hot. Effector equals sweat and blood vessels at the skin surface equal body loses heat and temperature returns to normal. So as your body gets hot, the thermal regulation in your brain says, okay, we've got enough heat, so it may make you sweat. The sweating then evaporates the heat off of you, cooling the overall body. So this would be an example of a negative feedback system. The negative feedback in it is it's doing the opposite of the initial stimulus. A positive feedback system. Action reinforces the stimulus or performs the same action as the stimulus. Example of this, pardon me, is going to be pitocin and contractions and clotting. Contractions excite the production of pitocin, and until the baby is born, the pitocin then excites the contractions. As far as clotting of blood, the clot excites the production of more clot. So if you have a clot that develops, every time that a platelet passes or something with fibrinogen passes in it, it's going to make the clot bigger and allow the clot to form what is called the common pathway. So again, this is going to be reinforcing the initial stimulus. Homeostasis and disease. Human body attempts to maintain balance even under the effects of disease, and that is correct. It is not proactive, it is reactive. An example of this. If you had an arterial cut and you were bleeding out, the proactive part of it is going to be, don't get the arterial cut to begin with. The body's not like that. It is reactive. So an example of this, it can be a self-perpetuating circle due to its ability to react. If you had an arterial cut and you were bleeding out, the way that your body would respond to it is it's going to release adrenaline, which constricts the vessels. That may slow down some of the bleeding and get you more clotting factor there, but in the same light, it's going to increase your heart rate and increase your oxygen demand on your body. So if the vessel did not close, it would continually bleed out and make the whole situation worse. So the body is reactive, not proactive. The language of anatomy: surface anatomy, sectional anatomy, and then body cavities. Surface anatomy, we're going to look at anatomical landmarks and anatomical regions. And anatomical landmarks: an anatomical position, hands at side, palms forward, and feet together. Supine is pretty much lying on your back, belly up, and prone is pretty much lying face down, belly down. And you'll probably see these on the test in these anatomical landmarks. This is anatomical position, facing forward, palms forward as well, arms at side. Be sure and know all of these locations: axillary, brachium, brachial, antecubitus, cranium, cephalon, cephalic, thoracis, mammary, abdomen, umbilicus, pelvis. Pretty much need to know these regions pretty well. Groin, pubis. We'll try to keep that one out of there if we can, but manus, hand, nasus, cervicus. Please be sure and recognize those anatomical regions. You may see them again on the test. Abdominal pelvic quadrants. We normally use the top list here, which are 4 quadrants: left upper, right upper, left lower, right lower. However, there are 9. If you want to take a look at this: left hypochondriac region, left lumbar region, left inguinal region, epigastric, umbilical, hypogastric, right hypochondriac, right lumbar, right inguinal. We generally use the 4 quadrants for assessment, but there are actually 9 regions. Just be aware of that. Sectional anatomy. Now you're going to need to know these terms well. There's several questions like this on the test. Proximal versus distal. Medial is going to be towards the midline of the body. Lateral would be out. Again, proximal, distal. Cranial, caudal. Dorsal is going to be the back. Ventral or the anterior. You'll need to know these planes too. Frontal plane, which is going to be this line here, cutting through the body. They would cut it into anterior, posterior positions. You're going to need to know the transverse. This is how a CAT scan would take a look at you, and slices. And then sagittal, which would be left and right. And you'll need to know these as well. Superior is above, inferior is below, left, right, from the anatomical position, anterior, posterior. Body cavities. Again, here comes the anterior and posterior. You have the pleural cavity, you have the pericardial cavity, which houses the heart. The pleural cavity houses the lungs. You have the abdominal pelvic cavity, and then in it you have the peritoneal cavity. Pelvic cavity, it's the same one, kind of dips down. You'll be aware of all these structures. Clinical note time. X-ray. X-radiation passes through an object and outlines a picture on sensitive media. The X-ray media is actually in the cassette that they use, and the radiation passes through. Your bones are denser. That's why you can see them so well. Now, a CAT scan is computer axial tomography, and it's a variation, still using radiation, but it does it in slices so that we can see everything on this transverse plane, so we can see various sections of it. Now, why that would be important? If you had a tumor growing in a specific organ, and it would look like different growth and it would look like different material. So as the CAT scan comes across it, it may make out the outline of that foreign tissue. An MRI, or magnetic resonant imaging, medical imaging technique used in radiology to visualize detailed internal structures. And an MRI, actually, if there was a foreign material developing inside the organ, the MRI would see it probably better than the CAT scan would. It does it in a way of a magnetic field is placed around the body, and sound waves are used to bounce off specific organs. So as the MRI takes a look at it, it can provide more detail. An echogram. Sound waves generate picture of internal structures, and I got some pictures of these to show you here. First one is X-ray. I believe probably everyone's seen an X-ray. It outlines the bones pretty well. And CAT scan, this is our transverse plane, and it would look at slices within the actual body. And this here is a 3D CAT scan. It makes a three-dimensional image after the slices have all occurred. And in case you're wondering what that is, this is an NG tube that they put into a person with a basilar skull fracture. And guess where this NG tube is located? It's pretty much coiled up in his brain. This is an MRI, or a magnetic resonant image. It gives us a nice look at internal structures. This is going to be the spinal column here, and these are going to be the vertebrae. And this is an echogram, more specifically an echogram of the heart. Mitral valve, which is actually going to be on the left side. This is the left ventricle, right atria, and left atria, and the tricuspid. If you have any questions concerning this chapter, feel free to contact me. Numbers listed on this slide: 405-219-7613, and easy email to reach me at is going to be smithr@imsa.net. Thank you for your time.